So hello everyone and welcome to Aura's virtual town hall meetings. This is a space that I designed for us to foster a dialogue, to learn about new ideas, and also to take action. And today I'm super excited to be in the company of an old and new friend, Agustin Cabrera, who is the director of the Repower L.A. Coalition. The Repower L.A. Coalition is a campaign from Lane, from the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, and they have been doing an incredible work in Los Angeles, making sure that workers are heard, that people, working class people in Los Angeles are also, and a lot more. So Agustin will be able to tell us more. So here you are. Welcome, Agustin. How are you? Yeah. So before we go into the topic that a lot of people want to hear about, which is, hey, I owe DWP, or I owe my electrical bill or my water. And what is this that we can maybe cancel or erase or end utility debt? I want people to learn a little bit about what the Repower LA's coalition is and how do you end up in this work?
to access to good paying jobs, a voice on the job, etc. And then I came to Lane, which is sort of a great organization in that it's still part of the labor movement. It still works to protect working class families and people, but also really integrates community and environmental justice. So it really is kind of like a mixture of a lot of movements to be able to build power here in the city and across the county. So that's sort of how I got started in this work. I've been the organizer, I was the organizer for Repower and our climate work at Lane for close to 4 years, and recently became the director of the campaign. So, I have such a soft spot for this coalition. As you said, you've worked with these people, how incredible they are. They are true warriors of the environment, of frontline communities. And so I've been able to learn so much from folks from people who work at CBE, Scope, Pacoima Beautiful, a lot of great organizations and movement builders here in LA. So, I've been really privileged to work with this coalition.
Yeah, and I'm super proud to say that in my days as a commissioner for the Department of Water and Power, I got the opportunity to work with Lane and pass things like the solar for renters, which was a true dream of mine, when I was an organizer for the Sierra Club, getting LA off of coal. So that was really something that was a milestone, at least for me personally, and also for my career. So I am so grateful to all of the members of the coalition and to people like yourself that have dedicated so much of their life to work to make sure that this coalition is strong and that is passing things that really protects people in Los Angeles, most vulnerable people in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think we need like a combination of the two, right? We need like strong advocates like the folks on Repower, but we also need fearless and bold leadership like you when you at your time at the commission or at the Board of Commissioners, because really we need leadership to really say this is important for us as well, and it's the direction that the city should go to. So we really appreciate your time on the commission and what you've been able to do to really advance your solar and all of the other like equitable programs at the department. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so, we are going through a very uncertain time in history. We're going through a pandemic, which I used to read about in fiction books. Nothing that I ever thought that this was going to become a
yeah,
reality. This has put a hole in our economy. It has highlight our dilapidated healthcare system and the inequalities. I mean, more than ever, we see a wage gap, an inequality gap. A lot of folks in the grassroots movement in Los Angeles were advocating to cancel rents.
right.
And for a long time, they were putting a lot of pressure on the mayor because people were really feeling, the economic struggles of this pandemic of COVID-19. A lot of people lost their jobs. They didn't have money. They didn't know what was going to happen next month. I mean, we have a stimulus. We had some stimulus in our economy that really didn't help working class people. It only helped, corporations, and again, continue this a wage gap. So now we have this campaign. You guys have this campaign about canceling or erasing, utility debt. So tell us about, just walk us through what the problem is, but not like first. So let me know if you want me to show some graphics.
Yeah, I
For
will.
folks, and at least on Facebook that are
I
watching.
see. Yeah. So as I said, Repower is a coalition of about 30 community-based groups, environmental justice, and labor unions, because that's a huge part when we're talking about sort of advancing climate justice, is really making sure that workers are also protected in our fight to combat climate change. And so our coalition really is centered around building equity, good jobs, and accessibility at LADWP, which is the largest public utility in the country. So a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think that the utilities are owned by most corporations, like most corporations, by a lot of shareholders and stockholders. But really, LADWP is different in that it is owned by the public. And so that's sort of why we have really centered our advocacy at LADWP, because we as ratepayers, as people who pay their bills every other month, we really have a choice in how our local utility is spending the resources, right? And so we really want to be able to increase energy democracy. And what that means is really having folks who are on the front lines, including workers, to decide how their energy is going into their home, right? And for a lot of folks, if they want it to be sustainable, they want it to be environmentally friendly, and making sure that it isn't causing more pollution than already is. And so that's a little bit about our coalition. And our current campaign is, as you said, erase utility debt. And this really started at the beginning of the pandemic. A lot of our base building groups, like some of the ones that I mentioned, CBE, Scope, and Employment Beautiful, really were telling us and sharing with the coalition that what they were hearing on the ground was that folks were making really difficult decisions. They didn't have money to pay rent. They were, struggling to pay their utility bills, and even making decisions about which bill they were going to pay versus if they were going to put food on their table for their families. And so, our city, the entire country, and the world is really, really facing multiple crises. And so we, as a coalition, really want to be able to push LADWP to take some responsibility in helping people, particularly low-income communities of color, during this crisis, and a way to recover. And so there's a graphic that you can pull up that kind of really shows sort of what we're talking about here in terms of these multiple crises playing all at once. So
and I think for the folks that are on Instagram and just in all across platforms, I'm speaking to Agustin Cabrera. He's the director of the Repower L.A. coalition from Lane. And we're talking about like the very reasons why canceling or erasing or deleting debt is the campaign that they're leading. And in the graphic that we have shown on Twitter and on Facebook and on YouTube, you can see that we have things like redlining, where African Americans were only allowed to buy land until not long ago in certain places. We also see the amount of solar or the renewable potential, if I'm correct, the environmental pollution. So the places that are the, you see, I feel like even the paleteros want
Yes,
to
exactly. They're
support
excited
this campaign.
That's
Even they want to
exactly.
support this campaign, so you can hear them in the
Girl
background.
hides in the house.
Absolutely. But the color screen, which shows pollution, the amounts of pollution in Los Angeles, and how it's concentrated in the areas where there's most people of color in low-income communities. I don't know if you have also in this map the solar potential, which I also like to show.
Yeah.
Which is also in the same area. So actually, the low income communities and the most polluted are the ones that can actually benefit the most and have the most potential for solar. But you're also showing here that COVID-19 map. And that's so telling because all of those three maps are very interchangeable and very interconnected. They're like in the same areas. Oh, would you like to talk more about that specific?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as you kind of laid out, so we have three maps focused of South LA, which for a lot of folks who may not know or may not be in the city, it is a working class, mainly Black, historically Black, and Latinx community of working class people that is currently transforming and is shifting every day. And so our partners at Scope created these maps and are really highlighting these maps because they do paint the picture of the crisis really well. So the first one is the redlining map, as you mentioned, Aura. It shows that where banks and government agencies would, purposely avoid making investments based on race. So that has contributed to longstanding racial segregation and disinvestment, and adding to structural poverty in these neighborhoods. The middle one is a more recent map from 2018 that shows that the highest places of pollution and poverty are in places like South LA because of various industries, because of the freeway. I mean, that's sort of why you have, South LA is kind of locked in between the 10 and the 110, 105 and the 405. And that's really by design, right? And so these communities are burdened with pollution and with high unemployment rates and poverty. And then the third one is, as you said, is the highest rates of COVID-19. So disproportionately Black and Latinx people are dying of COVID-19 and are being impacted by the pandemic. And so, what we also noticed in our research is that these same communities like South LA have the highest rates of enrollment in LADWP's low-income programs and are in payment plans. So by virtue, these people are struggling. They're struggling to pay these bills. So on top of the climate crisis, on top of the economic crisis, they are not being able to really make ends meet by paying in their bills. And so we wanted to really use these kinds of maps and data to really show the department that they need to make an investment in these communities because historically they've been disinvested and they're currently, being impacted by one of the worst pandemics that I think we have seen in recent and modern years. And so that's why we want to make sure that, the largest public utility in the country really knows that investing in low-income communities of color like South LA is the best way to address these racial inequities that have historically burdened these people for a very long time.
And I really appreciate you guys' angle of investments in our communities. This is not some charity. This is something that historically and systemically has been happening to people of color, Latinos, and African Americans historically in LA.
Yeah.
And, I mean, even like I said, in my role as a commissioner, I have so many stories about inequalities at the department that needs to be addressed. So this is an exciting moment to be talking about this, especially as we see also talks about defunding the police. So this is also how defunding the police looks like. So if we put some of those funds on things like canceling utility debt, like your water and power, like, I mean, wouldn't that be beneficial for all of us? So I guess my next question to you is, what is utility debt? So, because I think, so, I mean, I was always amazed to see how people sometimes didn't even know what DWP was.
Right.
So, why
Yeah,
don't we walk people into, I don't know if you have another slide where you can explain maybe a little better what utility debt is.
So utility debt, I think, really plainly put, is there are a lot of utilities that people pay, monthly or bi-monthly, whether it's their water, electricity, trash, all of these public services that they also kind of have to put, and some private. And so the debt is really accumulated when people don't have either stable bills, or they don't have jobs, or low wage work. And so all of these factors really contribute to people not being able to pay their bills in full, because they just don't have the resources to do so. Especially as in communities like South LA, where most of the homes or apartments are older, a lot of folks don't have energy efficient homes, which means they're not able to lock in the heat during the winter, or cool air during the summer. And so that really drives up energy bills, right? We just saw 2 weeks ago, we had one of the highest records of temperatures. And it was a massive heat wave. And so people were inside, and for privileged folks who have AC, that meant running their AC for most of the day, right? And so all of
Absolutely.
that brings up the cost of your energy bill. And so for folks who are
I
barely
also just want to highlight that in a lot of households that are low income, the majority of times they live in older homes that are not weatherized, so they don't have like the latest technology in terms of energy efficiency, to kind of make sure that the home can, sustain good heat and also cold weather. So they already in disadvantage. They have appliances that are also outdated, that are maybe energy efficient, that have the little star. I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about. So they're already spending more money, and they're hella poor. So we're talking about people that are already struggling to pay their bills, that have an old AC, that live in an old home, and that their home is not ready to in-house to like keep it cool. So all of that air escaping, if you know what I mean. I know that I'm taking you through this like imaginary journey of this household.
Yes.
And they're the ones that are paying the most for water and power. So we're asking LADWP to step up, to invest in those families and those people, and especially now where we have when we are in something I don't even know how to name it. It's something unheard of, which is a pandemic, for them to support Angelenos that are in most need.
Yeah. Even before, if you go to our Instagram page or Facebook page, you'll see that we have this data that really says that even before COVID-19, these communities, 1 in 7 customers were having difficulty paying their electricity and energy bill. And so even before the pandemic, people were already at a disadvantage. They were already disproportionately paying more because of what you said, and lack of efficient products in their homes, lack of weatherization. And so people going into this pandemic were already sort of struggling to pay their bills. Now it's just being even exacerbated. And so as you mentioned earlier, this pandemic is really kind of exposing that, there is no social safety net for many folks, right? They don't have some, services and structures to really rely on when crises and pandemics like this happen. And so we want to take this moment to really tell DWP that this is the time to start investing in the communities that need it the most, because this pandemic isn't going to be the last, right? With climate change getting even worse, and with our economic crisis, even becoming a much more of a bigger problem, these pandemics and these moments are going to continue if we don't change. And so agencies like LADWP really need to be prepared. And so what that means is making sure that people have a clean slate after this pandemic by erasing their utility debt, but also automatically enrolling them in programs like the Home Energy Improvement Program, which does weatherize and install energy efficient products in their homes, because it's just not about making sure that people have no debt, but it's also making sure that they're prepared to have more stable bills in the future. It's got to be an immediate response and also a long-term strategy. And so that's sort of how we're thinking about this campaign.
So I know that you have a slide where you show what are the demands for this specific campaign, and what is it that we're asking DWP to do. So tell us what the demands are.
Yeah. So the way that we are sort of framing this campaign is, certain communities in LA are most impacted by climate change, by COVID-19, and the economic crisis. And so DWP's role and responsibility in advancing racial equity as during this moment is by investing in low-income communities of color like South LA. And so our proposal and our recommendations for DWP to help Angelenos recover from this crisis are three demands, right? Our first demand is utility debt erasure and bill stabilization. So erasing erasing utility debt for low-income folks that who have been impacted by COVID-19. Improving outreach so that folks who are eligible are able to actually apply for the program, which historically has been a problem for the department. Many of their low-income programs are historically under-enrolled. About 65% of eligible customers are enrolled in those programs. So that's a huge disparity. That means close to 35% of eligible people who could be saving some money on their bills don't even know about it. And so we really want them to invest in their outreach and customer service.
Wait, I want to pause there just to be crystal clear for folks in Los Angeles that are in DWP territory.
Sure.
So if I owe money to the LA Department of Water and Power, my water or energy or whatever, or both, because they come together, and I want to ask about sanitation. I don't know if that's going to be also embedded in there, because when we get the bill, we also get that. So if I owe $100 before, so if this passes, that means that will be erased and whatever. So if I owe before, the quarantine started on March 10th. So before March 10th, I used to owe $100, and then that has accrued to another. Right now I owe $300 to LADWP, I wish it was the case. That's a very low amount.
Yeah.
So I owe that much. So that means that LADWP will erase my debt. Would this apply to everyone in Los Angeles, or would this apply to certain people in Los Angeles?
So it wouldn't apply for everyone, right? Because there are really there's really wealthy Angelenos, right?
Right. That's why I'm asking you.
City, right? And so we want to make sure that those folks who do have the resources and the means are paying their fair share. And so this program is really focused on low-income folks. So there is some eligibility, and we are working with our community-based organizations to be able to craft and offer policy solutions that make sure that everyone who should be eligible for this program actually is able to participate and have their utility debt erased. So really focusing on low income folks who need it the most, who live in those communities that we just sort of pointed out, that are, at the risk of being displaced, are kind of experiencing gentrification and huge job losses. So really focusing on those communities that need it the most, that are Black and Latinx folks in the city.
Got it. So I'm assuming everybody that falls into the low income households category at DWP are the folks eligible to participate in this program goes.
There's a good distinction that I want to make, that it's not only low income, but no income. What we heard on Tuesday at the WP board meeting is that currently they don't have mechanisms to be able to qualify people who don't have a job to these low income discount programs. So that really was shocking for us as advocates, because, for people who don't currently have a job, they, as of right now, aren't able to apply for these programs because they're not able to show proof of their income, which really is ridiculous, right? And so we want to make sure that the department finds a way to be able to qualify both low income and people who don't have any job, whether it's through unemployment insurance or any other like SNAP benefits that show that these people are in need.
Got it. Okay, that's exciting, and I think that speaks a lot about what we talk about energy democracy,
right?
And how the idea that, again, LADWP is ours, and that it should work for us, and especially for those that are most affected by climate change, most affected by pollution, and now the new thing, which is most affected also by COVID-19, which is kind of, they all overlap into the same map.
Yeah. So our sort of the last point around our demand around utility debt erasure is that, the immediate relief is that folks kind of wipe out that debt that you sort of described, right? Like the 300 or 400 that they, accumulated during COVID, but also moving forward, that they have a sense of what their bill is going to be every month based on their monthly income. For a lot of folks in the city, why canceling rent is currently still important, was important at the beginning of the pandemic, is because they're rent burdened, right? A lot of people are paying over a third of their monthly income to rent. And so that really puts people, in a really difficult position. And so what we want to be able to establish at the DWP is that there's a cap for people's bills based on their monthly income, so that people don't become energy burdened the same way that many Angelenos are rent burdened. We want to make sure that there is no folks paying an absorbent amount. So if you're bringing in, $800, that $200 of that is going to your electricity bill. That doesn't make sense. That isn't, actually allowing Angelenos to really thrive and stay in the city, which is a huge problem. And so that's a huge component of our demand around utility debt erasure, is to make sure that there is a more, sustainable way of making sure people know what they're going to pay every other month on their DWP bill. And that includes, their water bill, that includes their sanitation bill too, because we want to make sure that they, what customers receive in their mail, what they see in that total amount is completely erased. And so that means working with other city agencies like sanitation, like the mayor's office and City Hall, to be able to find the resources to be able to pay for this debt erasure.
And I was just reflecting that, when I had my office hours, my public office hours with just anyone in the community or folks in the private sector, when I was a commissioner, I met actually one of my neighbors, someone in my area that had debt with LADWP and eventually got their water and power cut off.
Right.
And for months, she's been living in her home without water and power.
Wow.
And this was, quite alarming. And in fact, we went to her home. I couldn't even believe that this was even true, and in the second largest city in the country, and with some of the most expensive zip codes. So it just makes me reflect of, we're out of the quarantine almost. We're headed to a place where things are loosening up and getting more comfortable, even though more people are getting sick and dying.
That's right.
But we're loosening up a little more, so it's giving people a sense of normality. But if you have a lot of utility debt, that means that if you don't have a forgiveness or a erase or a cancellation policy in place, that means that hundreds, if not thousands, of Angelenos can end up living in their home without water and power.
That's right.
Because they can't afford to pay what they used to owe and what they owe now because of COVID-19. And there is no job or no support or aid from the federal government, or for that matter, from the state either.
Right. So the way that the city and the mayor reacted at the beginning of the pandemic was to enact a utility shutoff moratorium. So meaning that during the pandemic, no LADWP customer or even SoCal Gas customer could get their power or electricity shut off. But that moratorium is going to be lifted at the end of the year. And yeah, you're right. A lot of people seem to think that we're sort of coming out of this pandemic, and as more restaurants and more businesses open, people do have a sense of normalcy. But the truth is that we're still not out of this pandemic, and people still don't have jobs. Currently, the unemployment rate in the city is at 20%, and so people are still out of work. Their hours are being cut. There are still people who are really, really struggling right now. And so, as you mentioned, they've gone 6 months with accumulating debt. And so if we don't have a plan in place by the end of the year, what we're going to see is looming disconnections in the most vulnerable communities like South LA, Pacoima, and Wilmington. And those people, like your neighbor, are going to be without water and power in the pandemic, right? In a time where they need reliable energy, reliable water to be able to feed their children. And
sanitation, and making sure that you can wash your hands. I mean, that has become like the main thing now everywhere you go.
So that's sort of why we really want to create a sense of urgency, not only at DWP, but across the city at City Hall. Thankfully, Council President Nuri Martinez passed a motion 2 weeks ago instructing DWP to really act with urgency to create a utility debt forgiveness program. So we're super, super excited that we have her as a champion, and that that the rest of the council also decided that this was important, an important report. And so now it's on DWP's staff to really come up with a proposal that works for the most impacted Angelenos. So that's sort of where, and before the end of the year, because the moratorium is going to be lifted.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone in the audience has any questions, so feel free to put them in the comments. If you are on Instagram, you can use the little question mark icon next to the comments and leave your questions there. I'm curious about how the leadership has responded to these, demands. How has DWP responded to the need of the community to get utility debt forgiveness?
So I think, as I mentioned, City Council has responded in a really great way. With Council President Martinez championing this motion, it's a really good sign that the City Council understands the need for a utility debt forgiveness program. We have yet to kind of see how DWP staff will react, right? Because they still haven't, we still haven't been able to meet with them to kind of understand where they are at in terms of the program development. But I will say that the Board of Commissioners has reacted in such an amazing way. There's been recently a leadership change, and so there's a new board president. Her name is Cynthia McLean Hill, and a vice president, Susana Reyes, who are both really fierce women of color who their main priority is equity. And they really want to make sure that they're holding DWP accountable to the communities that we've been talking about. And so yesterday, actually, they invited groups like Repower, Pacoima Beautiful, and NRDC to present on our recommendations. And this is something that's never happened before. We've only been able to talk to the board in public comment, which for most of you who know, it's only a minute. You only get 60 seconds, so you kind of feel rushed to be able to say all of your thoughts in a matter of seconds, really. But they gave us 15 minutes to fully present and fully flesh out our proposals. And so I say this because I think it's such a huge, it's a good sign that we have some equity champions at the board that really want to see this through. And so they actually instructed DWP staff to come back with a proposal within 30 days, which only adds to the sense of urgency at the department. So we're really excited to be able to work with them and to kind of see this through. So that's sort of how leadership has reacted.
Amazing. So if I'm listening to these conversations and I want to partake, how can I do that? If I want to participate, if I want to support this campaign, if I want to take part, what can I do?
Yes, good question. So you can do multiple things. You can start by following Repower L.A. on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, where we give updates. This week, actually, we're going to launch community profiles because, you know, I can sit here as an advocate and talk about the need for utility debt, but I think what people need to know, particularly decision makers, is the human impact of COVID-19 and the climate crisis. Absolutely. And so we're going to be profiling community members like Deborah Holt from South LA, who is currently struggling with her utility bill. So we're going to be launching those community profiles so that we can really put a face to what we mean by utility debt, forgiveness. And so you can follow us. We also have a petition.
A petition. I shared the petition.
Circulating and that you've shared. And so if you send it to 5 of your friends or even 10 of your friends right now, to be able to get DWP to kind of know that there's a huge amount of Angelenos that want this, that are willing to call up at the next board meeting to demand a utility debt forgiveness. Really, I think that's how power is built, is by showing, decision makers that, people need this and that it's really important for folks.
So we deeply care. I see some questions here, and some of it I think is related to how are you going to pay for it.
Yeah.
And someone is asking about utility forgiveness bonds. So just to educate all of us on how DWP works. Yeah. DWP is an independent agency from the city council. They have their own budget. The budget, their annual budget can go from 9 billion to 16 billion, and this is without assets. So meaning like all the things that we own and the buildings and all that stuff. And the bonds that we usually trade at DWP are for retirement. So the way that DWP pays for things, for products and such, is through the stuff that we pay. But they have so the way that DWP makes their money, because they're not an IOU. Now I only know the acronyms. I can't remember.
Investor-owned utility. So they don't have
investor-owned utility. So that they don't have like a stakeholder. Like they don't have like boards that may meet, like have bonuses and things like that. They're a public. It's kind of like a nonprofit. They make enough to get the utility to work, so it kind of reinvested itself. So that wouldn't apply because the LA City Council doesn't pay for anything related to DWP. In fact, DWP has something very controversial every year. They are required, according to the charter, to give actually a chunk of money from their revenue to the city, to the general fund. But we're not going to discuss that. We don't want to start any drama here now.
For another virtual town hall.
We're going to do another virtual town hall meeting about that with actually somebody that knows really well about that topic and that issue. But I just wanted to circle back to let people know that even though these agencies are very interconnected, they actually work very independently.
That's right.
That's why DWP has their board of commissioners, and that's why you're mentioning, Agustin, so much the board of commissioners. That's like why it's so important for us to have champions there, because they're the ones that kind of decide how that works. Not City Hall, even though there are some overlapping checks and balances. So when LADWP decides on things, they kind of send it to the city council, and the city council says, okay, this is great, we approve. So that's kind of like the check and balances, but they're very independent agencies as is.
They influence each other, but ultimately, yeah, they do operate very differently. And to the question of where this is going to come from,
yeah, how are we going to pay for it?
There's resources there, as you said. The budget is quite big, from generating, their own electricity, selling, buying, things like that. It's just about priorities, right? The resources there, it's about priorities. And so what we want to really emphasize with the decision makers like the Board of Commissioners and to some extent City Council is that their priorities need to be in investing in low-income communities that are currently struggling. So that's really kind of where we want to be able to really emphasize the need for investment in these communities.
Amazing. I am so grateful for all the work that you do for us on our behalf. Thank you so much, Agustin, for all the hard work, for leading this coalition that has given so much fruit to LA and that has enacted so many beautiful policies that are benefiting all of us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk more about our campaign. And really, if you all follow us on Instagram and our different platforms, stay tuned, because we're not going to stop just at utility debt forgiveness. We really want to make sure that we're helping influence DWP to become even a more progressive city agency. And so we want more good jobs at the DWP. We want people from South LA to be able to get those good union jobs. We want 100% clean energy. We want to make sure that there's bill reduction programs. And so it doesn't stop at utility debt. It's one piece of sort of the longer struggle. And so really stay tuned and make sure that you follow us. And again, Auda, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat and reconnect.
Of course, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that we have you back when we're celebrating, or when there's a next milestone for this campaign. Let us know so we can continue pushing for a better DWP that works for all of us.
Cool. Yes, of course. Thank you, Auda.
All right, we'll talk very soon.
Okay.
All right, friends. So that was Agustin Cabrera from the Repower L.A. campaign. Please don't forget to give them a follow, sign the petition, make sure that you are also part of this campaign. Thank you so much for bringing all your questions and your answers and for being involved. We need all of you in order for us to have a city that works for all of us. So thank you so much, and you have a wonderful night. Thank you.